Welcome to the Bad Boss Brief. I am Stephanie Payrollo.
And I'm Eugene S. Robinson.
And we are at episode 66. And we are going to talk about quiet cracking and why we hate catchphrases like quiet cracking.
Get your kicks on Route 66. Okay, we're ready.
Exactly.
I'm so excited about this topic, by the way, because I've been quiet cracking for years. I'm an old hand at quiet cracking. So,
do you want to tell us what quiet cracking means?
Yeah, well, they come up with these little catchphrases because everybody's trying to put their thumb on the scale of changing the language. And so they had quiet firing, and then there was quiet hiring, and then there were quiet layoffs. So there's this whole thing about kind of management trying to put their finger on exactly what's happening in the heads of their workers. So quiet cracking is when you hate your job. I mean, fundamentally, but you're, because of bills or kids in college, you're concealing it and conceiving it. But ultimately, somebody at biz school tied it into productivity. That you're like less productive if you're unhappy. I mean, what? Somebody got paid for that study. Can you believe it? Can you believe you're less productive if you're miserable? So anyway, that's quiet.
Well, you had sent me an article about this, which I thought was really interesting. And so I, did a little research. And what I found is that quiet cracking is, so there's a company called Talent LMS that sells HR training services. Yeah. And they did a genius marketing move, which is this. They paid some money to do a small study. They looked at the small study and they came up with a catchphrase to articulate some behavior that they identified in the study, right? And the way that they define quiet cracking is a persistent feeling of workplace unhappiness that leads to disengagement, poor performance, and an increased desire to quit.
Yep.
And so and then what happened is it got picked up, right? So there is a PR firm or team that is going to use quiet cracking as a case study when they pitch new business. And they're going to show all of the pickup that this phrase got in Forbes, Fortune, Business Insider, CNBC. What bothers me about this catchphrase is that it is very cynical. Right? Yeah. What they're essentially saying, and you can go through their website and it has the little bullet points. What they're saying is that cracking is a reference to cracking up, as in an acute mental health crisis, right? And they're using it to package their services. Because what they say is you go down and you read their findings on quiet cracking, their solution to mental health issues suffered by workers that are so acute that they have trouble functioning is to buy their HR training services.
Yeah. But this is a sword that cuts a couple of different ways, and I had identified it as a media thing because of the way city desks work. City desk, editorial rooms, editorial pits, bullpens, whatever. And what started to happen is, I remember the ones that I've gotten from PR agencies that I've liked, underreported stories. I got on top of them quickly when I was doing Aussie, like graphene. Somehow I still remember that because it was just a miracle chemical, super resilient, real heavy but light, strong but light. And so that's what all city desks are getting, this thing from this PR agency about quiet cracking. And somebody goes, yeah, it's resonating with the media, so they're writing about it. It's a no-win. It's a win-win situation for the PR company because their stuff gets written about. They paid for the study, but nobody scratches the surface to go say, hey, who paid for the study? Oh, the PR people. Aha. Okay. We see. You're not liking it because it weaponizes, mental health, but I think it's dishonest in a couple of different ways as well.
Well, and it also, it goes back to something that we've talked about quite a bit, which is my frustration when individuals are blamed for systemic problems, right? So what's happening is that the admonition here is that workers and the managers who manage those workers are individually responsible for addressing stress at work.
Yeah.
And, there are circumstances in which that makes sense, right? So if there have been layoffs at a workplace and the 5 remaining people on a team are supposed to do the work that was previously handled by 12,
Yep.
and that is causing people to work long hours, not see their families, not be able to take care of themselves. They're stressed out. That is a problem that is solvable by a manager on a team, or at least addressable, right? So a manager might not be able to change their deliverables, but they could conceivably see if they could get more paid time off or flex hours or like some temporary workers. Like you could see that something along those lines is addressable. But my guess is that the majority of people who are suffering acute stress at work are suffering acute stress because of systemic issues.
Correct.
Right. And
Correct.
systemic issues, many of which are happening outside of the workplace.
Now, I have a question for you, because we've been on both sides of the management table. Is there a bifurcation between justifiable cracking and gold bricking, the old 1940s expression, for somebody who's underperforming and happy about it, right? I mean, is there such a thing as faking it versus fake versus real? I mean, how do you, if you're a good boss with well-intentioned boss, how do you keep from getting played if your perception of your workplace is so at odds with the people that work for you, and you suspect that they are gaming the system?
I mean, that's a really good question. I think that it is best to err on the side of the fact that people are accurate in their assessment of their own capacity and mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So one of the I was talking to a good friend of mine who works in the mental health field, and she was talking about the difference between the golden rule and the platinum rule. And I had never heard of this before. Have you ever heard of this before? So the golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Right.
The platinum rule is treat other people the way that you would like your family, community, and society to treat one another. So, for example, the problem with the golden rule is, let's say that when I go to work, I feel like a atmosphere of conviviality means that I tease and rib my coworkers. I might say something to a coworker like, bitch, please, you need to get your head out of your ass, because I appreciate being spoken to directly. And so I am treating people the way I am comfortable being treated. And if someone comes to me and says, or goes to HR and says, my boss is referring to me as a bitch, my response might be, well, that wouldn't bother me. So, right? The platinum rule is, do we want to, as a rule, refer to one another in derogatory, profane language? Probably not. Would you want your daughter, sister, wife to be referred to as a bitch at workplace by people who supervise her? Right. And I think it's a really interesting distinction, because a lot of what will happen when someone harms another person is the harmer, the one who did the harm, says, well, that wouldn't bother me if somebody did that to me. I'd be okay if somebody called me a bitch at work. That's the golden rule. If I personally do not mind behavior X, then why should another person mind? Rather than stepping back and looking at the larger picture. So I think part of it is, what is your frame of reference as a manager? If you are saying, I personally am fine working 60 hours a week, I've always done the job of 3 people, what are you complaining about? That's a problem. So I think that you are going to find managers who are using that golden rule, it doesn't bother me, rather than being able to step out of their own frame of reference and say, what does this mean? Right? Because obviously, if a manager is looking at someone who is doing the same work the manager could do easily and struggling, they're going to think that person is shirking. They're just lazy. They're whatever. Well, what if that person is profoundly dyslexic? What if they're neurodiverse in some other way? And they, what if they're autistic and they have to come to work and spend a huge amount of energy masking in conversation, right? And so I think I believe that managers should err on the side of assuming that people are accurate reporters in
Right.
terms of their capacity to do tasks and their emotional well-being.
Right. Right. Yeah. You certainly, to err on that side, certainly seems to deliver a better outcome, right? Because people who are quietly cracking and reach a breaking point will just leave. And if people are genuinely interested in rehabilitation, they might stay if they're confronted with a manager who cares. So yeah, I might agree with that.
Well, and I think also recognizing the systemic, right? Because I think, like, I have a friend who I was talking to recently. She is moving to Canada from the United States because her daughter is transgender. And she
Mm-hmm.
does not feel like it is safe for her daughter to live in this country. And I happen to agree with her assessment. So there are lots of people that are going to work in the Trump administration who are afraid that their trans family members or their Latino family members or pretty much anybody who speaks out politically. I mean, there's some, we're recording this the week before it airs, and there's been some pretty significant blows to the basic American concept of freedom of speech.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there are a lot of people who are showing up at work carrying the impact or the fear around the potential damage that they're going to face just going to work. And that's
Yes.
one of my frustrations with this article is they are saying, well, why are people upset at work? Well, because there's economic insecurity, because there's AI might be coming for our jobs. That's possible, but the chances are so, I always pay a lot of attention to the healthcare industry because of my personal experiences with terrible healthcare
Mm-hmm.
and the rapacious for-profit insurance companies. And
Yes.
there was an article in the Seattle Times. I live in Seattle. That Seattle Children's Hospital, which is one of the preeminent children's hospitals in the country, is laying off 150 people and they're closing 350 open jobs. So that is 500 positions of people
Mm-hmm.
who were caring for profoundly sick children
Mm-hmm.
that are not available anymore because
Yeah.
of cuts in federal funding
Yeah.
and other associated cuts to medical services.
Yeah.
There are lots of hospitals in red states, which are generally underfunded and have voted against additional federal, support. There are hospitals that are closing, clinics that are
Yep.
closing. So,
Yep.
how effectively are the parents of a child with significant health issues going to perform at work if they are worried that they have to move to another state to
Yeah.
access healthcare, or even if they live near one of the best children's hospitals in the country, that service is going to change and the capacity is going to change because federal funding has been limited while
Yeah.
FYI, oligarchs are paying less taxes than I am.
No, we can go back to Dick Cheney, who famously said, I think he was speaking in this instance about education, not to get overtly political, but he said, if you want better education, the solution is simple, pay for it. There you go.
Right.
This is not a government issue. This is a personal issue. You have enough money to pay for a good education for your kids, and your kids get a good education.
Right.
And somebody, I think it was a writer, I want to say like Nora Ephron or somebody like that. I recently read, she had a conversation with somebody overseas, and they had won a bunch of global awards in like economics and science for college students. And an American, maybe Nora Ephron, maybe some a woman of that ilk, said, how do you all do it? And the woman she was talking to from this country that had won all these awards said, well, we have accepted the concept that not everybody who's wealthy deserves an education, or we have accepted the concept that more than wealthy people deserve an education, right? Because just because you're poor doesn't mean you're stupid. So we educate everybody, right?
Right.
And it was like, period, close quote, mic drop. What a concept. Good public education for no money, In fact, it is suspect in places like Europe if you pay for a private education, because it's like you couldn't hack the public one, right? You weren't smart enough to be able to make. So it's kind of a reverse issue. But yeah, I think that I think maybe quiet cracking is a way for managerial types who are not who this show is based on to maybe not shoulder the responsibility for creating, But then I think about my time at Ozzy and how often I got called into the CEO's office to help with morale. Like, in other words, there was an understanding that there was a systemic problem, but the only solution to the problem was, we'll get Eugene to handle it. Which, I could perform perfectly well in the middle of a riot. That won't stop me, but in terms of passing along they didn't say good morale. So I consider that I did a good job of dealing with morale in my own inimitable way. But yeah, it seems like maybe a shirking of responsibility to a certain degree.
Well, but again, we can't blame managers who are well-intentioned for not being able to solve the problem. Like if my friend was working at a workplace where her manager came to her and said, "What's up with you?" And she said, "I have to leave the country to go and join my daughter who already is in Canada." That's not something the manager is going to solve with a training program.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think part of it, if you are this manager and if you are concerned about what's happening with the people that work for you, the best thing to do is just ask them. Right. And again, you are a manager. You're not a therapist. You don't need to be asking them about personal problems. You don't need to be asking them about mental health specifically, but just to try to understand, how are you?
Right.
Just an open-ended question. And then, is there anything here that I can do to support you? Is there anything that I can do to make your job easier? Sometimes just that, because I think part of the problem is there's this desire to say, well, if I can't fix it, I don't want to talk about it. Let's pretend it's not happening. And sometimes just naming it, just naming that, it's, I don't have any solution for my friend that's moving to Canada, but I'm also not trying to pretend that she's not having that experience. Like, I'm taking this class from something called the Feminism School, which I'm really liking. This woman, Dr. Kimberly George, and she was taught, we're going through this old text called Caliban and the Witch by Publicis, and, kind of a classic feminist work. And what she was talking about is the difference between resistance and denial. So resistance is fighting and saying, this is wrong. Whether you're naming it, you're going on a podcast and talking about it, you're carrying a sign through the street, that's active resistance. The opposite of that, or what is different, is denial. So the reason in George's idea, the reason that Hitler came to power was not because there wasn't enough resistance. It's because the majority of the population denied what was happening. They pretended it wasn't occurring. And I just think that's an interesting, what?
I think that's gracious. I think I'd have to go with Daniel Goldhagen on this. And the name of his book was Hitler's Willing Executioners. I think it tied in perfectly well with how people felt at the time. He was voted in, right? That's what we need to remember. So, but yeah.
But I think the idea of just there is some power to just naming what is happening, even if you can't fix it. And I think also, if you're a manager, try to look at, are we talking about solvable problems or not solvable problems, right? So if your team is very concerned that they're all going to be laid off because of AI, that isn't necessarily solvable, but you could talk through what the implications are, see if they need additional training on how to work effectively with AI. But if the team is upset because there've been, at Amazon, Microsoft's had some ongoing layoffs, right? And which really impacts the Seattle area because there's so many. Microsoft is based here. And, it's very hard to comfort someone who is part of an organization where there have been thousands and thousands of people who have been laid off, right? Yeah. That's not something that you can fix, right? I mean, I guess One of the things that I was thinking about as we were, getting ready for this show is let's flip it back to the personal. And like, can you think of an example where you were under a particular amount of stress, whether it's personal or because of the workplace, where you felt like you were experiencing quiet cracking, like a degree of workplace unhappiness that was so acute that it was difficult for you to function as well as you could at your job?
Yeah, a couple of times, um, but generally, I nose to the grindstone my way through it. What was unusual about Ozzy, which was the last time it happened to me, is that I had a CEO boss who said to me, "Listen, what I want from you is not to crash the car of you, but I want you to let me know before we've crashed that car so that we could." And it was a good managerial ploy, so that we could somehow remediate this. So we could take care of it. We could fix it. Do not burn out on me if you feel you're going to burn out. Let me know well before so we can keep the machine of you running. And so I worked, I think, at least 2, possibly 3 24-hour days. And this is before the beta launch. And that didn't burn me out. And then I set some crazy target, because it was a certain amount of professional machismo, also remarkably close to masochism. We said, well, how many articles could you write a week? I said 14. If I was at home, left to my own devices, I could do 1 article in the morning and give me a week lead time to make calls and to source the pieces. But I could do 1 in the morning and 1 by the afternoon. And of course, he stuck to that. And he only backed off of it when everybody else complained, blaming me for this unreasonable workload. But I actually hit that number several times, and I felt sick having done so. You have to work really hard to get 2 500, 600, 700 word articles a day. And then finally I said, well, he did say if I was cracking to come in town. So at one point we had a meeting. He's like, how are things going? I said, remember, I identified the prior meeting. I said, remember when you told me this? And he says, yeah. I said, I think I'm getting pretty close to burnout here. And he was like, yeah. All right, good. Duly noted. Thanks. That was the end of the meeting.
Right. And nothing changed. Nothing changed.
Well, to his credit, he never said anything would change. He just said, let me know. I mean, it's like the old Peter Sellers joke from Pink Panther. Does your dog bite? And the guy reaches down and pets the dog bites him. He goes, you said your dog didn't bite. He goes, it's not my dog. Tell me if you're cracking. I'm cracking. Thanks for telling me. That was that. There was no attempt at remediation. So I learned a valuable lesson that complaining got you nowhere, and just get your work done and get out of there. So, I mean, it was a triple storm. I was going through a divorce. One of my kids was, teenager, having teenage problems. I had to move out of my house, get an apartment. There were a lot of competing things, plus working these 24-hour days. And it was a tough time, but it was helpful for me to realize, like you see up in gyms now, I've been at least to 4 or 5 gyms where I've seen this on the wall. Nobody's coming to save you. I guess that's supposed to be motivational. So yeah, it was actually helpful for me to realize in the context of Ozzy that nobody was going to come and save us, including the woman who was the owner for a period of time, Laureen Powell Jobs, whose attitude was, well, I think she said at one point, or it was reported to me that she had said, I'm surprised you haven't lost more people. People quit. That's what happens. Machines break. Get new ones.
And I think there's a couple things in there, right? Which is the idea that we are machines.
Yeah.
That we just run, and when we're done running, you throw us out. And I think we have to look at this in the frame of late stage capitalism, which does treat us like disposable cogs. And I think that if we forget that, we do so at our peril. Right. So for you to talk about a boss who is, that's a classic bad boss anecdote. Come to me if you're stressed or burnt out, and then you go, okay, I didn't say I was going to change anything. Right. And I think that, and I assume that people who are listening to us would like to be better bosses. The idea is like, you need to, if you are going to be a better boss, then you need to acknowledge, what can I do to help?
Right.
And let's get creative, right? I hear you. I am trying to mitigate whatever I can, right? Which might be limited. But I think this is a problem. We say this over and over again. And I'm sure that there are younger listeners who think that we're talking about some olden time where, HR was not trustworthy and everybody was terrible. I don't think it's an olden time. I think we
No.
very much need to look at the frame of reference is in late stage capitalism is that they will suck the life out of you, right?
I'm smiling now because I remember I was working for a magazine. It's Grappling magazine, and the editor, Todd Hester at the time, decided to go to the owner, and he was killing himself, flying all over the world, and it was his second job, right? Because the guy couldn't pay him enough, flying all over the world to cover grappling and mixed martial arts. And so he asked Curtis Wong, his boss, goes over to his house and asks him, say, hey, do you think maybe I could get a 25% raise? And as he told the story, he was standing in Curtis's driveway, and Curtis was waxing his luxury automobile as he's having this conversation. And the part that I added that was a fiction was that a single tear dropped from Curtis's eye on his Rolls Royce as he cleaned it. And he looks at Todd and he goes, well, we just can't go throwing around money, can we? And that was the end of the discussion.
Right. Right. Well, and I want to end with some suggestions. If you are the person who is suffering acute stress and it's causing you to have challenges at work, what I'd like you to do is to get rid of this idea of quiet cracking, that somehow this is an individual problem. And the real impact is that it's causing you to be less productive, right?
Right.
Get rid of that narrative altogether. Think about the fact that this is an issue of your mental health, and go get your mental health checked and tended to in the same way you would if you had a compound fracture and a leg, your leg was broken and there was a bone sticking out. Treat it urgently, treat it importantly, get the support that you need, whether it's a therapist, whether it's time off, if you have the opportunity to go on some sort of leave, really prioritize, because I think what you have to recognize is that your boss is not going to do that. The organization is not going to do that. HR is not going to do that. That is really your responsibility. And even up to the point of like, you might need to go work at another place. You may need to look at another job, but that really you are the one, because I think this is like the sign on the gym. No one is coming to save you in corporate America. Right. And if you are fortunate enough to have a boss or an organization that is an outlier in that regard, fantastic. Take advantage of it. Take the leave, use the employee assistance program, go and let them pay for some therapy or whatever. But recognize that the entire system is set up to extract maximum value from you, right? And you are not a machine. You are a human being. You live in a body. That body gets sick. You experience stress, especially if you are experiencing stress that is related to some of the political, social, and cultural things that are happening right now. And then the other thing is, also keep in mind, community can be effective, right? Community, to me, community is really countercultural. Like I mentioned, I'm going through this feminism study, and I'm doing it with a group of women. And we got together last night. We get together once a month. And there's something profoundly countercultural in a group of women, and we are varying ages, races, life experiences. Some have kids at home. I'm, one of the older ones. And we talk about being women in this present moment. And there's something about it that is so reassuring. And we talk about politics, we talk about relationships, we talk about all the things. And think about ways in which you could use community and it's not going to be community at work, but use community outside of work, even if it's a bowling league or a book club. Like, are there people that you can gather with intentionally who might be facing some of the same challenges or stressors? Because, we are human beings. And if we can get together and we can name our shared difficulties, that in and of itself is countercultural, right? Because capitalism wants us to leave our terrible job, go home, get on the internet, look at social media and buy stuff, right? What they don't want is for us to go out and, as they used to say, touch grass or get together with people in person or bake and have joy and dance and, hug our kids. And so I think really being intentional about what is it systemically that is operating for you? Because what I don't want is for people to take these kinds of catchphrases, right? Whether it's, the way that imposter syndrome was used to hide the, racism and sexism that was actually causing people to suffer at work. Name what it is. We are in a very bad time, in a very bad place, in a very bad system. And for people to feel the impact of that is human response. It's appropriate and act accordingly.
Yeah. There was, I don't know if you saw this wonderfully, I'm going to use a cheese eating piece in the Wall Street Journal of all places about this kid, 27-year-old kid, graduates from university and has not been able to get a job of any significance. He's a finance guy. And he's sent out 1,000 resumes on LinkedIn, proving once again that LinkedIn doesn't really do much. And he finally was down to his last $700 living in New York City. And he said, screw it. He spent 130 of those dollars to have a sandwich board sign made up that he wore on Wall Street, walking up and down the street with his resumes, with a big sign that said, essentially, I sent out 1,000 resumes. I'm running out of money. I'm desperate. Here's my ask me for my resume. And this, it's this great piece of, how this guy has done this and these alternative ways of, Gen Z is approaching getting employed after college. And then at the end, I'm avidly reading, I'm waiting for the kicker. And at the end, he gets called into a meeting, gets like 2 interviews on Wall Street, gets called into a meeting. And then of course, at the end, he doesn't get a job. That's the biggest 2025 punchline ever. This great story about 1,000 resumes, and he goes to the streets and he takes his fate in his own hands. And in the end, there's just the Murdoch publication just doesn't get a job, and then goes on to an article about, whatever else.
Right.
So,
which I think is a sad but fitting close to this episode. If you have questions for us or ideas for future shows, WTF@badbossbrief.com. I read every email that comes in and respond to anyone who isn't selling us something. WTF@badbossbrief.com. And that's it for today. We will see you in a couple weeks. Bye.
Adios.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Bad Boss Brief podcast with your host, Eugene S. Robinson and Stephanie Payrolo. You can check out more of their work by visiting spayrolo.substack.com for Stephanie and eugenesrobinson.substack.com for Eugene. You can also find Eugene at Mr. Sleep 3, that's the number 3, on Insta. Reach out with your questions, concerns, worst case situations, or suggestions to us at WTF@badbossbrief.com. Stephanie will personally answer every single submission. Be sure to join us at badbossbrief.substack.com every other Wednesday for new episodes of Bad Boss Brief so you can gain further insights into your workplace environments. Until next time, don't be an asshole at work.